This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Nancy Benson. This week, why the word hormones may not mean what you think.
They looked for a word that meant to arouse other glands in the body.
How hormones make you feel fully human when Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Reed Pence, the producer and host of Radio Health Journal. If you like listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
Even though it's been an incredibly stressful time, I think some of those adaptations that have been made in order to cope will become more permanent.
How are suburbs shifting to meet modern needs? Then,
we had rain in January in the high Arctic, which is not something that happened at all when William Barents, my navigator explorer, was there more than 400 years ago.
The noticeable changes in the icy northernmost region of our Earth. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Radio Health Journal and Viewpoints on your favorite radio station, and subscribe and listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Radio Health Journal.
Why are some people 7 feet tall? Why do others weigh 500 pounds or have an enormous amount of hair all over their bodies? Long ago, before we knew the answers to those questions, people with such characteristics were often displayed as freaks in the circus. The giant, the bearded lady, and so on. Today, we know the reason why is hormones. Hormonal imbalances cause many of these abnormal outward physical traits. But back in the late 1800s, when so-called freak shows were still popular, the word hormone had yet to be coined.
When the doctors in England first came up with this theory, which was a controversial theory, that there are these potent tiny chemicals in the body that control so much and that are targeted from one gland to another, sort of like our internal Wi-Fi, they needed a word for it. We had called them just internal secretions, things that were secreted from glands. But these doctors said, oh, no, there's more to it than just secreting. They arouse. So they looked for a word that meant to arouse other glands in the body.
That's Dr. Randy Hutter Epstein, who teaches at both Yale University and the Columbia School of Journalism, and is the author of Aroused: The History of Hormones and How They Control Just About Everything.
They weren't thinking sex, though they were a little bit. They knew there was testes and ovaries and libido and probably some stuff, but they were also thinking arousing the pancreas, arousing the adrenal glands, arousing glands in the brain. So this Cambridge University classics professor said, how about something along the lines of hormoa, which means to arouse? And that's what they did. They went back to this meeting at the Royal Society in London and gave the definition of what they were studying and said hormones, as we may call them.
But if you mention the word hormones to just about anyone, the thought of cranky women may come to mind.
Or women going off the rails, which we all know men have hormones. Your dog has hormones, so does your cat. And so it's not just a vague notion of being moody or growing or changing. The definition of hormones that doctors like to talk about is a potent chemical secreted from one gland reaching a faraway target. And now we think, well, of course, we kind of think in terms of things moving along and having a targeted missile when we think of drones or other things. But back in 1905, this was a really new, revolutionary way to think about the body.
How revolutionary? Before the science of endocrinology, experts thought that messages from one part of the body traveled along nerves to another part of the body.
Even when these doctors in 1905 presented this new theory of hormones, a gland that secretes a chemical substance and goes right to its target, there were some critics that were like, oh, they must travel along nerves, but we just can't see them. They must be tiny nerves.
Research ultimately showed that it doesn't matter where these hormone-secreting glands are located because the messages they send get to where they need to go.
One of the very, very first hormone studies was done in 1848 in the backyard of a German doctor's house. And what he did, he asked that question, can these glands work no matter where they are in the body? And the answer is yes, because hormones will find their target. What did he do? He castrated roosters, took their testicles off, and then he put one testicle, he implanted it into the belly of a castrated rooster. So this rooster had nothing between its drumsticks, but it had this lone testicle in its belly. And it did what it had to do. It made the rooster, it went from being a castrated, slow, lazy, tired rooster, made its comb redder, got its energy back. So then we realized, actually, we didn't realize right then. This study got a little lost for 50 years, but we have learned that no, these glands will work anywhere in the body.
Okay, so is this just a gee whiz factoid, or does it have some medical significance? It turns out the answer is yes, it does.
There's been research recently into women that might have to undergo chemotherapy or might hurt their fertility. Can we put some ovarian cells somewhere else in the body and see if they can still secrete hormones to produce eggs? So these are sort of the things that doctors are fiddling with, knowing that glands can work anywhere in the body. If you know anyone that has to take insulin, and we all seem to know someone with diabetes, they don't have to inject that insulin right into their pancreas. They can put the insulin anywhere, and that hormone will go to the target where it's needed.
Even though there are 7 glands in different parts of the body that secrete different hormones, Epstein says the system is more like a web than like separate silos pumping out their individual chemicals. And that's partly why she thinks endocrinology is one of the most fascinating fields in medicine.
If there's anyone listening that's thinking, what field of science or medicine should I go into? I think endocrinology is such an exciting field now. I think that there's so much we don't know. There's so much we've learned in the last 100 years, but I think what we don't know makes an exciting field for those entering it. We still need to learn a lot more about menopause. Any women that have gone through menopause know that we don't deal with it as well as we probably could. We're learning about certain brain cells that we think might be responsible for hot flashes, but we need more research into that. We could probably use a lot better research into ways for birth control. We have this wonderful birth control pill, but anyone that's been on it knows that there's side effects, and they'd probably want something with fewer side effects or better ways to control pregnancy.
Epstein says her own grandmother suffered from a hormonal imbalance, though at the time everyone just thought her grandma tanned extremely well. But when her lively grandmother became listless and complained that food was too bland and needed more salt, it was clear something was wrong. It turned out she had a cortisone deficiency, Addison's disease. Cortisone is a hormone produced by the adrenals, which sit right on top of the kidneys.
When she was born in 1900, the word hormone didn't even exist. And by the time she was diagnosed in 1970, not only did we have this whole field of endocrinology, but we could measure her hormone defect down to the billionth of a gram. So we've made huge strides, but there's a lot more that we can do to understand the pushes and pulls of being a human.
Dr. Randy Hutter Epstein's book, Aroused, is available now. To find out more about her and all our guests, visit our website at radiohealthjournal.org. Our writer-producer this week is Polly Hansen. Studio production is by Jason Dickey. I'm Nancy Benson. Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
There's been some evidence now that possibly the risk of heart attack stays elevated during the duration that we are on daylight savings time.
What happens to the mind and body when we spring ahead every year?
Then, the increase in sexually transmitted diseases despite pandemic shutdowns.
I think people's pandemic fatigue has sort of hit a wall, and I've just noticed that patients are out there dating again and therefore getting STDs.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Radio Health Journal is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.